Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast series, I delve into the hidden characteristics of OCD, anxiety, and anxiety disorders. The things that most people don't see, that are behind closed doors and shut within the mind about anxiety. My goal with these podcasts is to bring about awareness of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, or OCD. Understand that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these podcasts are things that I have used, discovered, or have been recommended to me, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. This podcast was recorded March 29th, 2019. This is podcast number 29, Handling OCD in the Office. And this podcast is focused really towards the employee, the employer, small business owners that have some employees, or just for themselves too, managers, supervisors, anybody that's dealing with people in an office, or the person themselves that are in the office that have OCD. And what we want to look at is how to be able to deal with that in a business situation. And I want to tell you just quickly how I got here and my involvement with business-wise. It was back in 2009, 2010 when my daughter was diagnosed with severe OCD. And it was a very rough time. It was very severe, very anxiety-driven and abusive, violent. It was a really bad time in our life, and I had my own business then. Back then I was doing web design work and working with a client actually up in Shelby, North Carolina, and having to travel up there. When all the dramatic chaos was going on in my house, it was a very tough time. My brain was split. I would leave sometimes with my daughter having a violent episode when I left the house at 7 o'clock in the morning, my wife holding our youngest child, who was about a year old at the time, and trying to hold off my daughter from hurting her and also from running out of the house after me. So I know and understand how it can affect business because, like I said, my mind was kind of torn in two. Half the time it was there at work trying to do what the work I was doing, and half my brain and half my time was back home worrying and wondering what was going on with my wife and with my kids with the OCD. So I know firsthand how it can affect business and how it can affect the work that is done by somebody who's suffering from OCD or someone who is having to deal with somebody that's suffering, and how it can affect productivity, how it can affect time management, the scale of your business. My business, I think, faltered because of that. My mind wasn't all totally focused and clear on what I was doing. So it really did hamper my business. So I understand from a business sense how OCD can affect, even though it wasn't me that was having the OCD, it was still within the family. And of course, I always talk about family suffers just about as much as the person dealing with OCD because they're having to deal with the chaos and the mess that's going on. So I'd like to first too look at defining OCD. If you haven't heard any of the other podcasts I've done about it, I want to just quickly define what OCD was for anybody that's just tuning in because they heard it was about business and how to deal with it. So OCD is Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, and it's classified as a mental health disorder that affects people of all ages. and occurs when a person gets caught up in a cycle of obsessive thoughts and compulsions. Obsessions are the unwanted thoughts that reel through the mind, that trigger um, really tough feelings and bad thoughts and all of that. And then compulsions are the behaviors that an OCD person will do to try to stop the obsessive thoughts. There's a belief in an OCD person that by doing a certain thing, whatever that thing is, and that we'll go through that here in just a second too, we will be able to stop or hamper those uh, really obsessive thoughts. So that's what OCD is. It's when thoughts overwhelm you and then take on uh, these behaviors that really drive you crazy. So, and to understand too, there's a lot of myths out there about OCD, and one of them is about organization, that it's an organizational thing, that they want to have things neat and orderly and straight and all of that. And I want to throw that out the window right now, especially in a business sense, because business is about it's an organization itself, and it's a lot of organization and keeping things uh, in a line, and that's not OCD. Somebody that's just an organizational person, somebody that's more worried about organization, they can get a certain thing into a certain pattern, lined up correctly, or their desk a certain neatness. And they only worry about it for about maybe 5-10 minutes, and they're able to actually walk away from it because, okay, I didn't get it all straightened up, but I'll get it done later. An OCD person is a person that takes a situation and it has to be a certain way, just right feeling, or um, and if it's not, they will stress over it for hours, maybe days. It will consume them. So the big difference between just an organizational person and an OCD person is the amount and time that is spent on worrying and fearing and stressing and obsessing over something is to an extreme. And it usually takes over their life, or it can, or at least hampers them from doing the regular things that they normally would do. So just want to make sure we understand that it's not about organization. It's not just about cleanliness or um, being neat at all. It's really an anxiety-driven disorder. And to kind of give you an idea of the cycle or the pattern, it starts out usually with some kind of trigger, and that trigger brings on an intrusive thought. And the trigger could be somebody dying, some accident happened, something unusual coming about that just sets it off. And it goes into these thoughts. And these thoughts can be very evil, very bad. They can be thoughts that somebody's going to get hurt, somebody's going to get killed, something bad's going to happen if I don't do this pattern. And so that leads to the compulsive behavior, which can be a multitude of things, and we'll talk about that a little bit too, which then leads to more intrusive thoughts, which then kind of starts bringing in anger and can bring in depression. And then from there you start doing things like having doubts and questioning everything. You then start doing more compulsive things like checking and all that, which leads to more triggers, which leads to, it's just a cyclical thing that happens. So just to kind of briefly cut over to some of the things that OCD people stress about or suffer about. One is contamination, dirty, germs, cleanliness. They obsess about it. The idea of losing control, that I'm going to do something to harm myself or someone else. More likely it's someone else. Being violent, taking actions, blurting things out, things like that, losing control. Harm, again, going back to something terrible is going to happen, going to hurt somebody. Uh, Perfectionism is another one that really plays into, it's taking perfectionism to an extreme place. There are sometimes people that are obsessing over sexual thoughts and, forbidden or perverted thoughts, and that's a really tough place. They also can have religious obsessions, worried about being condemned by God, by doing things against God, blaspheming, all of that kind of stuff. So, what to look for an employer, for the person themselves to really pay attention to, but for others to be able to see, to start getting some clues to it, um, is that everything's done to an extreme, of course. Cleaning. You may notice them taking wet wipes and wiping their desk down at the start of the day, the midday, during the day, wiping their hands down with wet wipes, wiping objects, computers, keyboards, all of that, cleaning stuff excessively, cleaning it more than once a day is excessive. Really cleaning, somebody coming in the office and cleaning their desk every day is a little bit excessive in a way, but doing it multiple times a day and over again is what you look for. Um, the other thing I always talk about is looking for signs, physical signs like hands that are cracked, very highly cracked and dry, almost bleeding. Usually can be a sign that they're doing the compulsive act of washing their hands excessively. Because that was something that happened with my own daughter. But you also want to look at for excessive worrying over things, stressing over, did I write the right thing in my report? Is my report correct? And having to print it out again, reread it again, scratch through, print it out again. Are they doing excessive amount of stressing and worrying and rewriting and rethinking on any issue, any problem? Listen to people that might be counting, having to do something a certain amount of times, either even or odd. Listen for them to, they might be quietly counting to themselves at certain points, even when they're in the room with others, they might be very quietly doing a 1, 2, 3, and doing an action multiple times, but to an even or odd status. So you want to look for those kind of repetitive actions that might be going on. The behaviors that some of the most common behaviors are excessive checking. Checking to make sure they have their keys, checking to make sure they lock the desk, checking a report over and over and over, just to make sure that they wrote it correctly. They don't think they did. Oh, did I forget something? Excessive cleaning, like I talked about the hands, the desk. Are they doing it more than what you might consider normal? Counting, like I talked about, catastrophizing, taking a piece of news and just bringing it to the extreme, going over and over something that's happened and worrying and stressing and fretting over it. So, what can businesses do to help someone with OCD? And let me make it clear right now, one, that an employer themselves are really not the ones that are here to cure it. One of the things I look at is for the employer is helping that person cope through the day, make it through the day, make it through as easy as possible. You have to. There's a fine line with compensating them and feeding the OCD, but really an employer really wants to just make sure they can help them ease through the day without too many triggers. And also, it's kind of a fine line whether if they really want to point it out to the person that they see these things happening and wonder if it's OCD. It's not for the employer to diagnose. but it could be something that could be brought up and brought up in a manner of compassionately where I've noticed these things and it seems like this might be the scenario that it might be OCD and I want to help. I want to be able to help you make it through your day here so we're not adding to or feeding the OCD ourselves. First thing might want to think about is where that person is in the office. Where are they seated? Where is their office or their desk or their place they work at? Is it someplace that is close to doors and windows? Because they can get distracted. One of the things about OCD is I find it is a subset of many of the other disorders like ADHD or ADD or autism. When anxiety starts really getting flared up in anybody, OCD can start kicking in. So not putting them where there's a lot of distractions. Try to think about what could distract them. Being by a door where they can see people passing by. Being in the main center of the office where people are walking by constantly, going to the copy machine, going to get a cup of coffee, talking. Try to put them at a place where that isn't as trafficked. Is that the right word? Trafficked? Um, and they also might be in a place where you want to put them maybe in the back of the office or in a place where if their signs are very outwardly, that they're triggers and they have actions they do to calm them, you might want to put them in some place where they're not as noticed, where they could slip out of the office if they need to and take care of doing whatever actions they need to do to calm the OCD down, where they're not noticed. Because OCD can be an embarrassing thing for a person to do. And so they want to be in a place where they're not noticed if they're doing those kind of actions. Maybe they're in a cubicle where they can't be seen, which is good. Another thing is you want to be able to possibly give them more extended time for doing reporting or getting information together because they are constantly, their perfectionism comes out especially, and they're rereading, rewriting, doing it multiple times a lot of times to try to get it right because they don't feel like what they've written or what they put down is correct, so they have to check it over and over. So giving them a little more time. The next part is that in that same realm is letting them use laptops for taking notes, for doing their work, all of that, instead of writing because of saving the erase time. Because somebody with OCD may end up checking something so much that they're erasing and erasing and erasing the thought to put something else. You want to be careful with somebody with OCD that you're not making them read out loud in a meeting, presenting. It can be a problem. Where they're worried about what they're saying. Are they saying it correctly? They may have to say something over and over again in their mind, and so it makes it harder for them to present out loud. So what you might want to do in that case is allow them to possibly videotape their presentation to be able to show, or um, present it in a written format or typed, I should say typed, I just talked about writing, but in a printed format that they can pass out instead of having to present it live, loud, out loud. That might be a problem. Having more things, another thought is, books on tape, things on video and tape for training would be better for them. I talked about already a little bit about planning an escape route for them. Again, they may have to do trigger or they may have to do behaviors, little quirky things that they really don't want to be seen doing. And so they may be able to want to get out of the office, step outside somewhere, not in the smoking area, but somewhere where they can do the behavior or calm themselves out. So you want to be able to let them know that it's okay, or that they can let you know that they need to step out for that reason, and do it quietly, not in front of everybody. Now, big thing here, beware of triggering events. And what that means is that if you know that certain things trigger this person, you know, um, well, like presenting, having to present at a meeting, you don't want to pop that on them. Well, you don't really want to pop that on anybody because um, because they not being ready. Anybody's like that, but an OCD person especially. But you want to be aware of things that might trigger them within an event, an activity, a meeting, um, that would trigger them off, and so that you can give them kind of a warning about it and let them know ahead of time so that they can figure out a way, or that you can work with them and figure out a way how they can handle that. So if they know ahead of time that an activity, maybe everybody that it's a company meeting, but it's in another town, and they have to fly in, they have to stay at a hotel. If you know this in advance, you can let them know and say, okay, I know that, say, hotel rooms trigger you. How can we work through that? What can we do to help you be able to cope with that? Because we really need you at this meeting. So being aware of that can possibly help them to figure ways on how they're going to handle it ahead of time. Now, the other part of this, and again, we talked just briefly about, we don't want to go to a point where we're feeding into OCD necessarily. So we don't want to cancel the event or allow them not to come to the event or activity, because that would be kind of feeding the OCD. We want to find ways that we can help them cope with the situation. So it's important for that advanced notice of it. Um, and another big part of this, I believe, is being very open and teaching your staff, teaching the employees there. And again, for the employer, the person that has the OCD, this is something you can address with your boss if you're able to, that it would be good to educate the office as to any different anxieties, ADHD, OCD, just anxiety itself, and how going over some of these ideas with the office, educating them on what it means to have OCD, what it means to be ADHD, and how can we, as a group, be more cognizant of it, more conscious of it, um, and help others that might be suffering from this. What can we do? Because what I see that doing is helping to cut down on the bullying, the teasing, the embarrassment of a person dealing with these different disorders or these different anxieties. So educating your office makes it very helpful in understanding. Now, what can an employee do to help other employees? Well, one, they can be educated, know and understand what this person is going through, what triggers them, what its effects are, and then being the buddy, being the compassionate coach maybe, or a compassionate friend that can say, okay, I understand that's what you're going through, instead of teasing or bullying or whatever. So employers and employees both can do things, make awarenesses out there, do some changes that can help somebody cope with it and deal with it. Now, to let you know, just as some of the outside help that you might want to recommend, or for the person going through it, you want to think about what they call ERP therapy. It stands for Exposure Response Prevention Therapy. And it is one of the best methods for overcoming OCD. It's what I use for my daughter, for my son, and for clients to be able to really get them through it. It is a tough process, but it works very well. So you want to explore that, and possibly as an employee you might recommend it if the other person is open to recommendations. You might recommend looking for a therapist who really, truly understands OCD and understands ERP therapy. I can't emphasize that enough. And you can go up to the IOCDF.org, the International OCD Foundation, and there you can find therapists that work with OCD. It's really important that they understand OCD because you don't want to do just cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy. That usually doesn't work as well for an OCD person. You want to find somebody that ties that CBT to ERP. And of course, knowing what I do in the EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, the tapping process, I tie that in with the ERP. And I can help you with that too. I can guide you through the ERP and coach you along the way with it. So that's one thing to really think about, because you can get over OCD. You can manage it to a point of having a good, successful, fairly normal life with OCD. So I hope those things have helped for those people that are suffering from OCD to be able to know what you can do, how you might approach your employer and talk to them about this. You know, most people I think we're getting past the point of being afraid of this the stigmatism that we're going to be cast out or it's going to be taken against us. It might, depending on your employer, but if your employer is open, I think it doesn't hurt to talk about this, that, because you are still a capable person, and especially if you're going through and finding a therapist to work with and it's helping, then you need to let your employer know how they can help you to manage it. That concludes this podcast. Please leave me a comment or question below. That gives me good direction where to go on future podcasts. I would love to hear your invisible wheelchair stories if you're willing to share it. If you would, go to invisiblewheelchair.com and click on Tell Your Story. I want to remind you that OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, is treatable, and I can help you get past OCD. So if you have heard this podcast and others, and you feel like you need further assistance and would like to spend some time with me working through any issues you have, then feel free to book a session at focusedhealthyfamily.com or familyocd.com, or you can call me at 704-562-1630. I also offer $85 off initial discovery session if you mention that you heard it on this podcast. Finally, don't forget that there is a tapping recording that coincides with this podcast you may want to take advantage of. I hope you have enjoyed this podcast and will join me for the next one. Remember to keep tapping, talking, and transcending your life to new heights. Thank you, and have a great day.